Welcome back, guys. This is Rodrigo Fondor with another episode of Asheville Real Estate News, episode number 47 actually, and we're coming back today to circle around on tenant-landlord relationships. If you didn't listen to the first episode, it's episode 42, where we're talking about some tips and tricks for landlords. Today we're going to circle back around and focus more on the tenant side. We're going to go over things like security deposits, pets, what to expect when you're signing up for a lease, and a couple of other tidbits to ensure that you have a good relationship with your landlord and that things go smooth and as you expect them. So without further ado, Glenn, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks, Rodrigo.
Appreciate you being here. Really enjoyed our last episode and kind of excited to talk about the flip side of things today.
Absolutely.
For people who maybe didn't listen to episode 42 in the first one, can you give us a little bit of background context as far as why you are able to talk about this topic?
Yeah, I've been doing property management for, I guess maybe like 14, 15 years off and on now. Mm-hmm. So we've got a lot of stories, we've seen a lot, and I'm out there every day showing so crazy. So I've sort of compiled some tips here today, and hopefully this will help some of the people out there trying to find a house here.
Yeah. Before we get into the tips, what's your synopsis of where the market is from a rental standpoint as far as from a tenant's perspective?
So right now the market is pretty hot. This is the busy season, so there's a ton of people looking to find a house right now. And to be honest, there's just not that many on the market. There's a lot of scarcity, which is what's driving the prices up. And there's a lot of competition for the houses. So if you find a house that you like, you really need to be on your game to make sure that you get picked to move in.
And let's talk about that then. So how do you prepare yourself as a tenant to be on your game and be able to make a move on the house that you like?
Well, the first thing to think about is the time frame. So most tenants are required to give either 30 or 60 days notice to their landlord that they're moving out. So really the landlord won't know that they're moving out until that time. So a lot of people come looking for a house 6 months ahead of time, and we just have no idea what's going to be available then because the things that are on the market today will probably be rented by then, and by that time we won't know who's given notice and who's staying at their house. Another thing is when you go take a look at the house, not only picture what your furniture is going to be looking like there, but also take a look at the house and make sure you understand what kind of condition it's in, because you can probably expect that it's going to be in similar, slightly better condition from that point forward. So sort of what kind of landlord or management company you're going to be dealing with.
And are there anything you would look at specifically that you would say, hey, as a tenant, you should look at, I don't know, maybe like the inside of the fridge or I don't know, under the sink to see kind of get a gauge of the
You can
property. Usually
tell just whether it's been a well-kept house or not. I don't really have any specifics to go looking for.
Just use your gut?
Yeah, I guess, pretty much. I know that's probably not what people want to hear, but
that's a good starting place then, right? Like if you walk in and you have a good feeling about the condition, the cleanliness, and it's reasonable to expect that you're going to have a similar experience when you
Absolutely.
move in, right?
So another good question to ask when you're at these showings is this going to be a private landlord who's doing this individually, or are they going to use a management company?
Gotcha.
So there's lots of individual landlords that do a great job, but if you're dealing with a management company, these people are required to have a real estate license, and they're responsible to abiding by all the rules and regulations of the real estate commission. So often in those cases, everyone's going to be following the rules, but to that end, they're probably going to be a little less lenient when it comes time for collecting late rent or holding you to the terms of the lease.
So it's a double-edged sword, right?
It is, yeah. But as long as everybody's doing what they say they're going to do, then it works out great for everybody,
Which sometimes it can go either way, right? Which is just part of like being alive and living life, right?
Yeah. So one last tidbit about looking for houses is drive by the homes and see what the neighborhood's like. A lot of people want to rent things sight unseen. We don't do that here at Rent a Home, but I know there are people out there that'll do it. So try and see it in person, know what you're getting into beforehand, and maybe do a drive-by at nighttime, see what the neighborhood's like. It can be completely different,
A lot can change when the sun goes down.
Right, yeah.
absolutely. Great. Well, let's talk about what you need to have paperwork-wise or maybe funds-wise to be able to move quickly as a tenant.
Okay. Typically, landlords are going to be looking for an income of at least 3 times the monthly rent. So if it's a roommate situation or a family situation, everyone that's going to be living there combined needs to come up with that income.
Okay.
So typically to move in, you're going to be required to pay a security deposit. Often that's 1 month's rent, plus also the full first month's rent. So you've got to have $3,000 on hand if it's a $1,500 a month house. On top of that, you might have to pay a pet deposit, or there might be pet fees depending on how your landlord has it set up. And then as far as documents,
and utilities, right?
Yeah, utilities, you got to get those transferred as well, and often there's deposits associated with getting that turned on if it's a new account. And definitely call ahead of time to get those set up, because if you call the same day, you're not going to have power the same day.
Yeah.
So if you need it when you move in, it needs to be set up beforehand. And then as far as look for different things, but here we require a criminal background check and a criminal credit, rental reference, and we verify their employment. So we're going to need copies of their driver's license, any pay stubs. So if you can go ahead and round those up and have those together before you start your house hunt, that can help you get to the front of the pack when it comes time to submit your application.
Because your landlord or the management companies can be waiting on information to get to them, right?
Right, exactly.
So you referenced criminal checks, right? And credit checks. Really quickly on that, how far does stuff usually haunt people, right? Like, say I'm 50 years old and made a decision I might not have been super enthused with back when I was 22. Yeah. Is that going to affect me when I'm 50, 30, 25? Like, what's, same thing with credit. When
considering the criminal background checks, landlords should really not take into account anything from 7 years ago or prior. So just the most recent 7 years. And if those charges have been dismissed, you shouldn't hold that against a tenant either.
Okay, so 7 years is give or take the rule of thumb.
Yes, they've done a bunch of studies, not me, but they, and apparently the risk is or her creating or committing a new crime is the same as someone who had never been to jail. Oh, wow, that's a cool perspective. That's where the 7 years comes from. That makes sense. Huh. It's a great tidbit. What about with credit? With credit, a lot of times we find that people don't know what their credit score is, and if it's lower than they thought, they have no idea why. So when we pull their credit report and let them know what it is and say these are the charges on your account that are not paid currently, they're surprised to find out that they still owe something to some apartment complex they moved out of 3 years ago, and that's still affecting them now. So pay attention to it. I'm not an expert on credit reports by any means, but
there's a lot of tools out there, right? So Google it and just be on top of it before you start applying them. And also, tenants that rent through us, we also report to Experian and the credit bureau, so paying your rent on time helps you build credit. So if your landlord is not doing that, they could possibly be doing that, or you could do something to help yourself build credit. I recommend to a lot of people, if you don't have any credit and want to build it, just get a credit card, and buy a few small things a month, pay it off that same month, and that'll help you. Okay, cool, great. So one other thing you're referencing as far as the costs was we were talking about pets. Yes. So, pets. Enlighten us. Well, a lot of landlords are worried that pets are going to cause damage at their house. So they either charge... They do though, right? They do sometimes. A lot of times they don't, and it goes back to doing your references and speaking to their previous landlord to see if their dog did tear up the last place or not, if they got their whole pet deposit back or whatnot. But yeah, you can expect that you're going to have to pay either pet rent or some sort of pet deposit. We have our deposits be refundable, but there are some out there that is just a pet fee that you will not get that money back even if they don't cause any damage. So when it comes time to sign the lease, we'll talk more about this in a minute, but read everything and know what you're getting into with the pet deposit. Okay, quick question, and when we're talking about pets right now, there's I've heard a lot of different things about service animals versus not service animals, and like, you know, the different classifications that you know, different animals can carry, and how to tread through those waters. Could you give us any insight on all that? I know it's a really complex topic, but
it is a complex topic, and there's a lot of conflicting information out there. So it's hard to say for sure, but in general, I think it's fair for a landlord to ask for some sort of documentation if they are claiming that they do have a service animal or an emotional support animal or something like that. I feel that you should be able to ask for a physician's note that says, you know, I have some sort of disability and this dog is prescribed to me, basically, and it's legitimate.
And then as a tenant, it would help you to have that doctor's note or recommendation, or whatever
already
that documentation
on hand
is,
when you
right?
submit it, yes. And if that is the case, for any people that do have service animals, we don't charge a security deposit or a pet deposit.
You don't?
For those people, correct.
Gotcha. Because they're not seen as quote unquote as a pet so much as more of like an extension, or
yes.
Okay. Huh, that's really interesting.
So another thing when it comes to pets, a lot of landlords and insurance companies really don't like aggressive breeds. So I know pit bulls are a popular breed around Asheville, but they're not always popular with a landlord. So check with them beforehand before you spend money on an application, if they're going to be okay with that, if their homeowner's insurance will cover that. And even if it's not an aggressive breed, if it's a really big animal like a Great Dane or a Bull Mastiff or something like that, you may get turned down just because it's too big for the space. You know, these one-bedroom apartments can't really accommodate a large animal like that.
It's like putting a horse on like a postage
it's not
stamp,
fair to the dog either.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Heard. Okay, cool. Has there been any crazy animals that you guys have had to like apply or pass through your like, just like, oh my goodness, this person has an ostrich or something?
We've had a miniature horse,
and
rabbits.
Horse?
And turtles. Rabbits and turtles are kind of normal, but miniature horse.
Wow, that's crazy. Okay, cool. So let's talk about that. So when you are signing your lease, what are the things you should look for? What are the things that you hope are in there? And you know, let's take it from there.
Well, a lot of landlords will use a standard North Carolina lease, and we'll put a link to that in the comments below. That's a standardized form that's used by most landlords. In North Carolina, it's put together by the Association of Realtors and the NC Bar Association. So it covers most situations.
Yeah, it's pretty wordy, right?
Yes, it is pretty wordy. So a lot of private landlords may draft their own. It may be based on that. It may not be. Just make sure whatever you are signing, you read the whole thing.
Right.
Don't just assume that it is what you think it is. You know, actually go through and read the terms. And there's probably going to be a section in there about the landlord's right of entry. So you need to make sure and know.
You understand what that is?
Yes, yeah. So typically there's going to be a clause in the lease that allows the landlord to come in and make repairs and you know, show the property if it's becoming available again. So you need to know how much notice that person's required to give you before they come in. You know, so you don't want to be in a situation where you're home and the landlord just, you know, invites himself over to show someone the property and you're not ready for it. So there's also probably going to be a section in there about tenants' obligations. So, you know, utilities, mowing the grass, cleaning the gutters, things like that are going to be mentioned, and you need to know whose responsibility that is before you sign up, you know, because a lot of people are not ready to climb a ladder and clean a gutter, you know, and they don't realize that's a responsibility unless they read that. So
have there been any clauses that you've seen some landlords try to sneak into leases that a tenant should be aware of?
I've seen landlords require that you know, a tenant's required to have it professionally cleaned upon move out or something like that, or that something about the renewal term. That's another thing that you should definitely look at, is be aware of the term of the lease and what your renewal options are at the end of that term, whether you're going to be forced to sign for another year or hit the road, or whether you can go month to month at that time, or you know, whether this is a 6-month lease or a year-long lease. You know, some people just don't realize whether it's a short-term or long-term rental, so you got to be very clear and you know
the dates.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else on leases that you would like to add?
Yes, when you move out in North Carolina, you're required to give notice to your landlord in writing. So as a general rule, all your communications between tenant and landlord should be in writing.
What constitutes writing? Email,
text message, anything that you could pull up later and print out and
reference
in court if it came down to it, will suffice. A phone call is not going to be good. A conversation you just had, if it's written on a cocktail napkin at a bar and everybody signed it, that's a legal contract. So as long as it's in writing.
Gotcha. I wanted to follow up with you and 2 questions, right? So what is the duty or protection that a tenant might have versus a landlord saying, hey, your lease is up, I want you to move? Is there any?
Yes, if they're in the initial term of their lease, say it's a year-long lease, and he wants to kick them out before that year is over, he can't do that. That's a breach of the lease.
Right.
So they have every right to stay there. Once that lease ends, typically it'll be a 30-day notice situation where he has to give them 30 days notice, or they can give him 30 days notice, or her.
And if that notice happens, there's nothing to fight, right? Like that's just part of the contract between the tenant and the landlord?
Right, yeah. At the end of the day, it's the landlord's house, and they own it, they make the rules. If they want it back, they're welcome to take it back, as long as you haven't signed some contract or a lease that says that you're allowed to be there.
Are there any situations in which I, as a tenant, can withhold rent from the landlord?
No.
So no matter how egregious anything is happening or how in disrepair the house is, I have to still pay rent?
That really depends on the situation. So in the last podcast, we talked about the North Carolina laws, GS 42, 43. The one right before that, which I think is 42, 41, says that they're mutually dependent. So if the landlord is they would have a leg to stand on in court, but they can't just stop paying rent. They're going to have to go through the proper legal actions to do that, or else they're also not holding up their end of the lease because they're not paying the rent.
It's a tricky one. I know there's a lot of times you hear or see people in conversation say, oh, well, just don't pay rent then. Or deduct, you have to fix that yourself, to just deduct it from your rent. You would say it doesn't work like that,
right? Be careful before you do that. You're going to have to give your plenty of notice in writing, requests for these repairs to be made, and be able to prove that you've made these requests and that they haven't been made in a timely manner. So it goes back to having everything in writing again.
And even then, it doesn't necessarily mean you get to, just because somebody else didn't uphold their end of the agreement, doesn't mean you can
I'm
do
sure
the
it's
same,
going to come down to a small claims court kind of deal. So just know what you're getting into, and know your obligations, and take care of your end of the deal, and hopefully that won't come up.
Yeah. From a landlord's perspective, or as you all manage properties, throughout the course of a tenancy, somebody being in a property, are there any recommendations as far as how to handle disputes, or if you're disgruntled? Like at some point in time, there's probably going to be something that the landlord does or does not do that as a tenant's going to be frustrating. How do you approach that, and how do you handle those situations from a tenant's perspective?
The first one would be to try and communicate with your landlord and see if you can resolve it with him. If that is just not working out, you can call the fire marshal, and he'll come inspect your house, and if it's not up to the housing codes here in Buncombe County, then he'll make a list of repairs that need to be made, and there'll be a re-inspection in, I think, 90 days or something like that. They have a certain amount of time period to make these repairs, and if they're not done, then there's pretty hefty fines for the landlord for not doing that, and probably the house can get condemned. I haven't been down that road, thank God, yet, but there are options for tenants, so they can contact the local government and talk about that. There's also a place called Pisgah Legal here in town, and
it's the landlord's nightmare to hear that, right?
It is, yeah. we don't like hearing about Pisgah Legal.
But I know they serve a super important role, right? Because there are some landlords that are incredibly negligent.
Yeah, there's definitely a need for Pisgah Legal.
Slapped on the wrist.
Some deserve more than a slap on the wrist,
for sure.
I'd say. So there's definitely a need, and Pisgah Legal is, a good thing for the community.
Yeah.
But that being said, the reason they have a wishy-washy reputation, I guess, is because they are the place where a tenant can just go and try and bring up a frivolous lawsuit. So there's a lot of people that may or may not have a leg to stand on who go there and pursue that route.
Whoever the landlord's going to be paying time, fees, etc.
Right.
So
To properly defend themselves against this lawsuit, they're going to have to hire an attorney, and that's going to cost money.
would you say as a tenant it's a cause for concern if the landlord isn't requiring for you to sign a lease and like put a security deposit down and whatnot and go through some of the hoops we've talked about?
I'm sorry, say that again?
So like as a tenant, if I go to rent a property and the landlord's like, oh, don't worry, this is a handshake deal. Yeah, I like you, don't put a security deposit down. And they're kind of like lenient on some quote unquote, typical industry standards.
Right.
Like I think that'd be a cause of concern, and I don't
Absolutely,
love to hear your
that sounds
opinion on
like a lot of red flags. I would want to have a contract so I knew what everybody was, responsible for and obligated to do. And I would expect a landlord to want to protect their interests. So it'd be a big red flag to me if they weren't asking for a security deposit. I guess if you're not paying them any money and they want to just let you move into their house without signing a contract or paying any money, but then you might be in a trespassing situations. I don't Zillow and Trulia. You can Google property management companies and go to their individual websites. Sometimes you'll find stuff there that's not listed elsewhere. Have your documents ready so that you can secure a house when you find the one you want. And just be very thorough when you go through your lease and know what the expectations are, and keep the communication line open between yourself and your landlord, because that's going to help everything go smoothly.
Cool. Awesome, Glenn. Thanks so much for the time. And
no problem.
I know everybody's going to find it helpful. I enjoyed the conversation, so thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Rodrigo.
Absolutely.
All right, guys, there you guys know. You heard it from the mouth of the expert. What to do to get, as a tenant, how to have a good relationship with your landlord, how to secure a property, and what sort of hoops you need to be ready for and ready to jump through. So if you got somebody who's renting a property or is on the hunt, tag them below, share this video with them, let us know how we're doing, and look forward to you guys chatting with you all next week. Take care.